Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about, you know, the difficulties and the fears that surround forming healthy relationships in the aftermath of being scapegoated. And after having gone through, surviving a narcissistic family system. Now, the thing is that there really are terribly toxic and manipulative, self-serving, shape-shifting, abusive people out there. And those people are sometimes parents. And then there's the people who surround them and protect them, and who either look the other way because it's too difficult to actually address the real situation, and people will make excuses for them, saying that this is culturally normal, for example, or that they've been through a lot and this is why they abuse, or and you'll have entire families that completely ignore what a person like this is doing to their own child, to their teenager, or even to their spouse, to their coworkers, to their friends. I mean, a lot of people fall for the double-faced, shape-shifting tactics, and those who do witness the things that actually go on behind closed doors will often bury their heads and give these manipulators power by enabling them, and by comforting them, and by appeasing them, thinking that this is what needs to happen. So being raised by this kind of person, by this type of antagonistic personality, by a toxic person, by a narcissist, and then seeing them being protected, even though you've been through verbal assault, sexual abuse, physical abuse, character destruction, endless victimhood narratives, endless explanations that are designed to divert from what's really happening in the house. I mean, it will make you cautious of people. Yeah, this causes trauma, and this will naturally make us extremely cautious of meeting new people. And it also makes you wonder if every person that you'll ever meet is actually gonna throw you to the wolves and be like that with you, And for many years, I've definitely avoided forming friendships, and instead I kept myself isolated because of this. Because I was afraid that everybody was a narcissist. And I viewed the world very much as black and white. And, many of us survivors will inadvertently view narcissism as this all or nothing trait. But the thing is that it's actually all about degrees, and this is what I want to talk about with you, what I want to focus on with you today. You have to possess some degree of self-centeredness to protect and care for yourself. You have to care about yourself enough to put yourself first, especially when this is something that you've never been able to do in your family of origin, right? Because, by definition, us scapegoats are treated as if our mental health is something that doesn't matter. It's something that could be traded against favors, and it could be traded against breadcrumbs of love, or stuff, or material things, And if you love yourself enough to protect your mental health and to set boundaries with a person who is making you very sick, they will call you a narcissist. They will call you self-centered for doing this. When you set healthy boundaries to protect yourself against somebody who doesn't want you to have any, they will call you self-centered. And this becomes such a source of pain and confusion and self-doubt. But the thing is that if you don't see the importance of putting yourself at the center of your own world, if you don't see how you need to be a little bit narcissistic sometimes, then breaking out of this isolation is actually going to be an impossible thing to do. We need to actually we need to actually love ourselves enough to have some degree of selfishness. But what we're doing is not what they're doing. And sometimes what other people are doing, we can easily also confuse for what they are doing. You understand? So I want to take a look at this on a scale. At one point in this scale, you got like extreme narcissism, right? You got like the people that behave like as if you don't exist unless you serve them correctly. Unless you have something that they want from you, unless there's something that they can exploit from you, you're worth nothing. You're worthless. You have people that need you to use you as a source of supply. They need your reactions. They need your emotional attention on them all the time. And if they're not getting that attention, they will abuse. And so you got that at one end of the scale. And then all the way on the other end of the scale, you got the super people pleasers, which in fact, they can please so much that it becomes impossible not to have a conversations that revolves around anything else other than like sharing dramatic things that happen to you, or them overly giving and giving and giving, and believing that they have no needs. They don't need to have needs. As long as they please you, they're happy. So these are the two extremes. You got the super selfish, and then you have the super selfless to the point where you can become incredibly sick. So, and because I think that the healthy thing is to hover somewhere in the middle point, obviously, right? And maybe you'll sometimes slip, you'll dip slightly from side to side, right? But that doesn't mean when that happens that, when you see a slight deviation from the middle point, that it's actually going to dive into that intense end of the spectrum, And when you come across people that, the middle point is the healthy point, but when you detect the slightest sort of leaning towards one end of the other, it's so easy to sort of have this huge reaction and see this as a huge red flag, and basically throwing that person in the trash immediately, so to speak, to protect yourself from re-experiencing these extreme scales, where it reaches the point of abuse, and neglect and antagonisms, fictional drama creations and so on, But, the thing is now, all of us, whether we admit it to ourselves or not, have tipped on either side of this spectrum slightly, at least, minimum. We all judge someone at some point. We all overreacted at some point. We all said a white lie to not do that thing that we didn't want to do at some point. We all shape-shifted at some point. We all complained about, something at some point. And even good-hearted people will break rules just because they're not necessarily self-aware at that particular moment in time of a part of themselves which is coming out. Even safe people will do this, and you will do this, and I will do this too. So, and rationalizing is a part of human nature, really, So, for example, I want to tell you, for example, my neighbor, I have a neighbor, she's a really nice person. She's older than me, and she's kind, and, she always smiles, always says hello, and, when my kids were younger and would play on the street and stuff, I mean, she would look out for them, and you know, a nice person. But you know, I had a get together one evening, and she came and knocked and complained about the noise, you know. And even though she actually has regular get-togethers with her girlfriends, and things can get way louder than what I was doing in my backyard, you know, we were all sitting around the fire. It wasn't, you know, so her behavior could easily be viewed as hypocrisy, you know, and it can be seen as a huge red flag. But the thing is, I've known this person for years now, and I don't think this person is a narcissist at all. You know, I don't get that vibe from her. I think that she isn't aware that she's doing this, and I don't think that there's anything necessarily malicious behind this. But still, the behavior remains something that could easily lead to somewhere, right? When people show us their imperfections, their quirks, when they lack self-awareness around certain things, you know, the immediate reflex is to like completely throw it's black or white. Oh, okay, this person, right away, red flag, and I you know, that's it, you know, it's finished. But the thing is that I'm trying to say is that we all have our faults, and you know, we all have things that we do that we may not always be aware of that we're doing. And this doesn't mean that we are bad people, or that when people show us their imperfections that they're bad people as well. And you know, we all have our faults, and this doesn't mean that their faults or our faults are going to tip into these extremes of absolute narcissism. And I really say that with honesty, you know, like coming from my background, you know, like I have experienced absolute betrayal. I mean, there's nobody left in my life, nobody, there's no family, I got no one except for the self-created family that I made. So what I'm sharing with you is sort of how I went about this, and how I learned to view my relationships with people in the aftermath, so that I could actually find out who the good people are and connect with them, so I can recreate my own world, you know. And that's the trick. So I'm going to explain to you through this analogy for how I learned to navigate this, okay? And this analogy is about easing into meeting people and slowly breaking out of the isolation. But it does not apply to everyone, okay? You know, when you meet like, you know who's been toxic to you, and you know who enabled the narcissistic and toxic or manipulative or antagonistic or emotionally immature person in your life, okay? I'm not talking about giving them any leeway. I personally wouldn't, because patterns are very clear. And when you keep going in circles and circles and circles all your life, trying to tell the same people that you're hurting, and then they go la 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 la, and they just ignore completely what's going on, well, I'm a firm believer that no contact personally is the best and healthiest thing that you can do to protect yourself, because those loops don't end. They don't end, okay? It goes on and on and on and on and on and on, and everything is always rationalized. Extreme abusive behavior is normalized and rationalized, okay? So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about relearning to socialize after the trauma of having gone through a narcissistic family system. So, you know, when it comes to people, I got different categories, okay? I got my observational zone. This is where I got my acquaintances, the strangers, people I meet, people, you know, if I have like activities that I do regularly, you know, people those are the people that I'll put in my observational zone, okay? Then you got the people in the evaluation zone, the second zone. You know, that's one step closer to you. And this is where you get curious about a person. You inquire about them to see if it could be a potential connection, okay? And then the third section is really the trust zone, okay? This is where the people that I know, for me personally, I put the people that are in that section are people who are consistent in their behavior. I know what to expect. Their patterns are, I've seen their patterns and I know what to expect, and they're not perfect, but they're not unhealthy. You know what I mean? And, you know, the trust zone, it takes a long time to put somebody in the trust zone. The evaluation zone, the middle zone, this is the zone where you keep people for a couple of months, even a year, 2 years if you have to, you know. And this is the zone that requires the most work. This is where you will experience triggers, and this is where you're going to get to know their imperfections for the first time, you know, as you have to. So you have to expect that this zone, you know, is going to be the evaluation zone, is where the work is going to be done. Now, when we start to notice the scale tipping, right, you know, an imperfection of some sort, you know, the first instinct is to generally put that person in the trash because we've been traumatized. So of course the first instinct is protect yourself, put them in the trash, avoid and get rid of them. However, unless what you're seeing is really a ridiculously obvious sign, you know, like verbal assault, or they're associated with your abuser and they're defending them, you know, or they discarded you when you needed help, you know, during your history, you know, you know, well, during your history. I'll take that back because I'm talking about meeting new people. But having said that, like, I'm not talking about, you know, putting people that are associated with your narcissistic family system. But you know, you obviously see things like disrespect, you know, you see like very obvious signs, then okay, I understand why you would want to like get rid of them immediately, because you do have an instinct that you have to trust. But the thing is, if you notice that a person is not abusive, but just maybe you feel triggered, you feel, you know, you feel triggered, but what they're doing is not openly something that's necessarily like, you know, a big sign. What you can do instead of discarding them is just putting them back in the observation zone, okay? And just revert to sort of emotionally detaching, but keeping them, like observing them, observe their patterns, and sort of be professional towards them, and you know, courteous, that sort of thing, you know. And when you do this, you might actually discover things about them, because the trigger will eventually pass, so you can sort of be cautious around them, but you can discover things about them that might surprise you and that you didn't know before. And I'm going to give you an example of this. A person that I met, who I'm actually friends with now, who I actually let in, you know, when I met her, she had certain mannerisms about herself that I initially found alarming, you know. For me, it was unsafe flags, you know. And I initially misunderstood her behavior as being cold and unfriendly. And I also honestly, truly thought that this person was judging me, and that she even hated me. That was how I felt, you know. And on top of that, she had this really minimalistic approach to texting, you know. And so, you know, because we were part of this weekly group activity, you know, and if she would send me a question and I would answer her question, then she wouldn't respond. She wouldn't say, oh, thanks for the info. She wouldn't give me any information like that. And I thought that was weird. And another thing too is, if I would text her, she would give me extremely short answers like no. And that was it. There was nothing. It was very cold, you know. And I took that, like I said, as like somebody who was super unfriendly and unhealthy for me. So, but I didn't discard her. I wasn't rude to her per se. I didn't burn my bridge. I simply put her in the observation zone and kept her, like, I emotionally didn't attach myself to her, but kept her under observation. And then after some time, once I got to know her, I realized this person was actually extremely introverted and extremely shy, and she was also extremely isolated because of things that happened to her. So she was isolating herself. And so I realized that through observation that she was also actually a really stable person. Like if she told you she was going to do something, she would always show up, she would always do it, and you could really expect certain things from her because she kept her word, and she's, quite stable in her patterns. There's no roller coaster. She's a very stable person, and and of course I noticed she did have levels of empathy for other people. It wasn't that she was hard, it was just her mannerisms that I didn't understand, and that took me some time to get used to. And so now she's become a friend because I did not discard her immediately, but I kept her in that gray zone for quite some time, even though I felt the triggers and I didn't know what was going to come next. The tendency when we're traumatized is to put people in the trash can right away. It's either you're with me or you're against me. But we actually completely ignore this huge gray zone in the middle. And gray is actually a pretty good place to be. Gray is good. We like gray, Putting people in the observation zone is also really useful because if you actually decide that the person that you're meeting is toxic, and you don't want to let them in, it's better to just remain professional. Protect yourself and emotionally detach, but just protect yourself and remain professional with them in a public setting, or just be courteous and professional, but just don't get involved. You keep them at a distance and you observe them and you don't get closer to them instead of immediately, getting extremely reactive with them, or quitting that thing that you're doing also, because of that. You know what I mean? So I had several people that I put back in that observation, in the acquaintance zone, actually. After I observed them, I put them back in the acquaintance zone, and I remain courteous, but they will never come a step closer to me because I do not like the patterns that I observed, and I trust myself for that. And that's it. I'm not going to make a huge mountain about it. I'm not going to be reactive about it. I'm just not going to let them in. And I'll remain my courteous self. So, I'm not going to deprive myself from recreating a healthy life for myself and creating healthy connections for myself because of what my mother did to me. You understand? And the destruction that she has caused me. I have no blood family left because of what that woman did, and because of how she manipulated everyone into believing that my character was so evil that I didn't deserve to have a mother in my life, that my character was so evil that I deserved to be told that I was evil and that nobody was ever going to love me and that I was going to die alone. That's what she would tell me when I was 10, 12, 13, 14. That was normal in my family, that I would be spoken to like that a child would be spoken to like that. You know what I mean? And they all abandoned me in the end. They all abandoned me when I put my boundaries down with her. But you know what? I'm not going to let that define me because I deserve so much better. And so do you. The world is very big, okay? And right now, as I did that trick, as I would simply not view things in black and white anymore, but I would just put people in the observation zone instead of reacting. I would put them in the observation zone and I would just watch the show unfold. And this process is at least a good year, really, for you to get to know people and see their patterns and observe them and see if you can actually let them in and see if, their imperfections are actual dysfunctions, or if it's just that normal, healthy middle zone where we kind of, tip from one way to the other because we're human beings, but it's not going to go anywhere beyond that. You know what I mean? And so, nobody in my life treats me the way that she did. Nobody in my life right now invalidates me the way that my blood family did. Nobody in my life right now calls me crazy or thinks that it's normal for me to have a reaction. If I have a reaction to something, it's because something happened, and it deserves to be addressed. You know what I mean? Nobody diminishes me or invalidates me in my life at this moment. And if they did, they would just be put in the acquaintance zone, and I would not pay any attention to them anymore, and I would just keep them at a distance, be polite, and they're not going to ruin my activities. They're not going to ruin what I do. They're not going to ruin the peace that I'm creating for myself in my life. And these people's dysfunctional behavior just can't be my problem anymore. And this is where my self-centeredness comes in right now. This is where I know that they will, people that have anything to do with my past, they may always see me as cold-hearted and self-centered because of my act of protecting myself and prioritizing myself. But you know what? That's okay. And it doesn't matter to me, because I need to have some of that self-centeredness to protect myself. It's important to have it, This is where the place where my mental health and my emotional safety and the good things in my life come first, and those things come last. So yeah, I'm going to be self-centered about that. And that's just the way that it's going to be. And I invite you to do the same thing. And at the same time, having said that, I invite you to also view that other people also can have a level of self-centeredness, which is not going to dip into abusive behavior. What separates someone who is relatively healthy and someone who has narcissistic traits, is that extreme spectrum, right? It's that it's that pathological competitiveness, it's that mindset of scarcity, it's the envy, it's the meanness, it's the contempt, it's the bitterness, it's the manipulation, it's the shape-shifting, those mask wearing, is the abuse, right? So, narcissists, toxic people, immature parents, antagonists, whatever you want to call them, they can't see themselves as the problem. Everything always has to be somebody else's fault. And their emotions are always somebody else's fault. Them feeling invalidated because you didn't read their mind correctly or serve them the way that they wanted to be served that day, despite how much energy you've already put towards the relationship, this is their normal. So of course they're going to call you narcissistic when you protect yourself. And they're going to take something that's actually really healthy and twist that into something that's unhealthy, And so, listen, you inhabit this body, and we all responsible to preserve ourselves and to keep ourselves healthy. We need to put ourselves first when it comes to our emotional safety and our mental health. And it's not possible to find your way out of this mess if you continue to believe that you're not lovable, or that you're not worthy of preserving some parts of yourself, or having empathy towards yourself first, And if you feel like you don't deserve to preserve yourself and don't deserve to protect yourself, then when other people do it, that might be a trigger, and you might actually feel like they are not healthy, when actually what they're doing is really not an extreme end of the spectrum. It's just really somewhere in the middle, And also, if you don't do that for yourself, you're going to go into that end of the spectrum where you consistently seek validation, and you consistently people please to the point where you kill yourself, So you need to be in that middle ground, and you must allow other people to also be in that middle ground, and learn to recognize that it's not necessarily going to go into these extremes, okay? So you gotta be a little bit selfish. You gotta love and trust yourself. And you gotta allow people to be a little bit selfish too. People have their own quirks. People have their own imperfections and their own things. But that doesn't mean that they are going to be abusive. And so put them in that observation zone and keep a watch on their patterns for a couple of months to a year to really find out what that is. But you're not gonna get that answer like immediately unless it's like super obvious. It takes time to get to know people. And so take your time when you get to know people, but know that it's not impossible to create a healthy world for yourself when you come out of these systems. It's actually really possible with a lot of work and a lot of patience and a lot of self-love and self-trust. So I hope this helped you, and I'll see you soon.